It's the next generation, you gets.
A podcast where he's too green for jokes.
I'm Tyler.
I'm Nick.
And I'm the biggest boss, Lukas.
And for God's sake, we are not doing the orc voices anymore, ever again on this show.
Yeah, that's a thing of the past.
All right, welcome everybody. Oh, it's time for the Orc Spectacular. I know that y'all have been looking forward to this for a long time, but they're mean, they're green, and they are here today. We're coming in hot and fresh, looking forward to a big GT next weekend, and this boy is taking orcs. He knows a thing or two about the faction. He's done pretty dang well with them in the last couple of weeks, months, and years. Check out our LVO episode to hear all the details about that. But we're talking about orcs. This is the second part in our three-part series on the TNG factions. Last week was Gene Stealer Cult, so if you love GSE, go check it out. In a couple weeks, we're going to do Leagues of Votann with Mr. Olsen Johnson over here, so look forward to that. But today is not about either of those factions. Today is about 14-foot-tall green furless gorillas, and I'm excited for it. But before we jump into everything that Lukas has got cooked up on the boys today, how are we doing? I'll start with Nick today. How you doing, Nick?
I'm doing great, honestly. Like, I went back to work this week, and basically caught up on all the 2 weeks of work I was missing, which was a bit stressful, but we got it all done. And last night was super cool. Just like went on a few walks, talked to a few people. We had a cool hobby night. So it's cool kind of getting back into that Warhammer headspace. I think I've finalized my list for Rosehammer, which is super cool. So now it's just a little bit of hobbying left, which is going to be done today, tomorrow, and the week leading up. So yeah, looking forward to that. Looking forward to playing some testing games later this afternoon as well with you two. And just overall, I don't know, looks like it's going to be a great weekend and a week ahead. How about you, Lukas? How are you doing on this lovely Saturday morning?
I'm doing great. I've been looking forward to the Orc episode, honestly. Just giving some thought to what I want to talk about and where Orcs are sitting in the meta right now, because Rosehammer is next week. And I'm just kind of mulling over the final couple hundred points on my list and deciding what to take. But I think I've settled on something that kind of hits all my bases. So I'm very excited for that. Yeah, it's been a good week. Just eager to play some 40K right now, honestly. The game, I feel like the game's in a fun, solid spot. Obviously, a couple things are pretty silly. We did have the Guard FAQ come out in the last week, right? So there's still some silliness about in the game, but overall, I feel like 40K is in a really fun, balanced spot. So I'm just having a lot of fun thinking about it and playing a ton of it right now. So yeah. Yeah, really excited to start talking about orcs. Is there anything else we want to go over, guys, before? Oh yeah, Tyler, how have you been?
Check in with our friend Tyler.
Indeed.
Thanks, Lukas. Yeah, I'm also doing real good, real hot. Lots going on. New GSC just dropped. There's a meme. I don't know what the meme is with new thing. I don't know anything about memes. Anyway, Eric Lathuris has figured out some really cool new GSC tech that he's taking this weekend that I'm really excited. I'll definitely talk about on another episode. I am similarly getting closer and closer to locked to my Rosehammer list. I have made tons of interesting changes that you'll get to hear about a lot in that episode. We'll see if what I end up landing on properly. List deadline isn't until Thursday, which is mildly sketch, but here we are. But yeah, so I'm excited about that. We earlier this week spent a bunch of time with our boy Colton prepping for Rosehammer, not just in terms of our preparation, but also his. We spent a couple hours with him building up all the terrain for that event. Terrain is legit. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be like nothing you've ever seen before. I'm very excited to get to play on that stuff. And I am very excited to take a little bit of a backseat in an episode for once and let Lukas take the Orky wheel and see if he can steer us in the general, or careen us, should I say, in the general direction of the Orky goodness. So without further ado, Lukas, take it away, brother. What's going on?
Yeah, so this is going to be an Orcs-focused show where I'm going to probably take a similar kind of tack to how Tyler approached his, where I'll talk a little bit about, just as a roadmap for what we're going to talk about in the next hour and a half, hopefully. Hopefully I don't get carried away. And well, we're going to start, just as a roadmap, we're going to start talking about where Orcs were pre-Arks of Omen. We'll talk about Arks of Omen changes. We'll talk about some list iterations I've had in the last, like, 2 to 3 months is, like, the recent Orc paradigm for me, since I started playing them again. And we'll talk a little bit about the new WAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAA that change has breathed like entirely new life into the faction, which is really cool. So I want to talk about like some of the implications of that. So, and then toward the end, if you guys have any questions or talking points about orcs that you guys want to bring up, make sure to put them in the chat over the course of the show today. And we'll answer them at the end. Or Nick and Tyler can bring them to my attention as we go through. That would be great if you guys could do that. Okay, cool. So to begin with, pre-Arks of Omen. Where were orcs sitting? This is kind of like the LVO meta, right? Like the months leading up to LVO and then culminating in that tournament. I think orcs were a really strong army. They had a lot going for them. The strongest part of what was going for them was their secondaries. Good Bits was not as good as it is now, but it was still just tons and tons of points. Green Tide was also tons and tons of points. Biggest and the best was at least a 10 basically every single game. And then you could always swap Green Tide for some other kill secondary. So the Orcs secondary game plan was, I think, on par with things like Sisters. Obviously not as cracked as Necrons, but it was very strong, having those easy defensive secondaries available to me. So you kind of wanted to build your army around that, right? You wanted a bunch of Gretchen. You wanted a tanky boss to stand on objectives and get a bunch of points. And then you just wanted like counterpunch units to, once the opponent like realized they had to come to you, you could just pounce on them with your whole army and destroy them. We also had the issue of Armor of Contempt, right? Because that didn't go away until just after LVO. So in the months leading up to LVO and at that tournament, you needed to take some kind of masked like AP3 and AP4 in your list. Otherwise, you just, in certain matchups, your damage just didn't cut the mustard. And yeah, so to account for that problem, I took Truck Boy Meganobs with the Truck Boy Warboss, and I think that was like the best anti-AOC option available to orcs at the time, and it honestly still is, or just in terms of dealing with big armored targets. But with AOC going away, it just makes all of the massed AP 1, 2, and 3 in our codex so much better. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go into the Arks of Omen changes. So Arks of Omen, we build this defensive list. We have our truck tool to help deal with AOC. And that's really the whole paradigm of the what is that, Nephilim meta, was we have these two questions that we need to answer. Well, the question of defensive secondaries and then also of dealing with AOC. That all changes for the most part when we get to Arks of Omen. We completely throw AOC out the window. So now all of the data sheets in the Orc Codex are worth looking at again, because there is just so much firepower in there. That's AP 1 and 2. Firepower and melee swings, obviously. And without AOC, it is just so much easier to kill things. So tons of more units are viable. The stuff that's already good just gets better, because, I mean, we're already taking kill rigs and pigs and things like that. And without AOC, they just hit so much harder. The secondaries also changed a little bit. Couple things here. Biggest and the best was dropped. So as a defensive option, that is just no longer on the table at all. And so our scoring did take a hit in that department a little bit. We still have Green Tide got better, and we still have the auto 15 of Good Bits. So those are still going strong for us. But biggest and the best going away is a big hit. And then also the meta in AO Arks of Omen is very interesting. It's very shooting heavy, which is usually difficult for orcs. But I will say that if orcs ever get to grips with the opponent, it can be very tough to dig out of a situation where you're being tagged in lots of places. And also just generally shooting armies in the game right now are also very squishy. And orcs have a lot of damage, so they can definitely turn the hurt on very quickly if the shooting player messes up and gets too close or anything like that. So, yeah, those are kind of like the changes for Arks of Omen, as opposed to the Nephilim meta that we just came out of. Anything else you guys have noticed about Arks of Omen, for just in general changes for orcs that I might have missed in the last 5 minutes or so?
Sorry, I may have missed it. Did you mention the best secondary change?
What's that? Oh, is it Stomp 'em Good?
Yeah.
I think there's 2 big secondary changes.
Yeah. Stomp 'em Good was sent from No Mercy, No Respite to purge the enemy.
And so why is this important?
Because you can take it and no prisoners. So in matchups where your opponent takes a lot of models and they won't be doing much melee combat, that's 30 points right there. I mean, depending on how many
imagine playing an army like that. God, how foolish you would have to be.
Very cringe, Tyler. Get your GSC out of here.
I might have missed it too. You go more in depth about like the just general secondary changes too.
Yeah, a lot of. Oh, are you talking about
like how Green Tide and Good Bits just got easier?
Yeah. Good Bits definitely got easier. A lot of folks have missed the Green Tide changes. I think it actually makes the secondary quite a bit worse because the exclusion zone is like not quite half the size, but the exclusion zone going down 3 inches is really big and helps those like kind of slower units that are good at scoring Green Tide, like Gretchen, actually get to other quarters like in 1 turn, which is really good.
You can also do things like stage better. You don't have to stay 6 away to score Green Tide.
Yeah, easier to hide behind buildings while doing it. So that's another big change that made that secondary. I'll take in most of my games now, and we'll talk about why when we get to the list composition, which is our next item. So yeah, just in general, really enjoying. Let's just get into the list actually, because I feel like it kind of obviously encapsulates what we're trying to do here with Orks. So let me just go into what I'm playing right now. This is like 99% of the 99% chance that this is what I'm playing for. I should have had this pulled up for Arks or for Rosehammer. Okay, so this is an Orks Ark of Omen detachment, and one thing I'm gonna probably harp on a little bit over the course of this podcast, over the course of this episode, is that a lot of the units that were already good are just going to still be are already good when AOC was good are going to still be good now, which is just wild to me. But you're going to see a lot of the same units that we were seeing in the Nephilim list. So this is an Arks of Omen detachment. It's Goffs. That was the best clan culture before, and it still is by far, in my opinion. We're going to have a Beastboss on Squigosaur. He's going to be the Warlord, so we can call the Waaagh. He's got Beasthide Mantle, 5 of Feel No Pain, and Propa Killy, so he's +1 attack and AP. So this guy comes in, and he's like the new Angie boss. You guys remember that boss that I had? Was that a previous LVO? The guy with the +1 strength and attack to help deal with Buggy's Nick. Do you remember that guy? I think that was Angie boss. Yeah, but he's the new Angie boss.
Yes.
Yeah, he's very cool. And so he's the Warlord. We got 2 more war bosses. We got Boss Zagstruk, who isn't actually a war boss keyword, to be clear. This is why you're allowed to have all 3 of them. But Boss Zagstruk, great unit. Super good with the new wall, which I'll talk about later. And then a war boss on Warbike with Killa, Klaw, Brutal, but Cunning. This is the smash boss that everyone knows and loves. Not as fast as the Trucker, not as nimble, but with Goffs definitely has the ability to pop off with some 6s. We got 3 squads of 10 Beast Naga boys. 3 squads of 10 Gretchen. We got 2 squads of 5 commandos with power claws. And then our compulsory choice, fast attack, I have 6 of them. 3 squads of 3 pigs, a squad of 10, a squad of 8, and a squad of 5 storm boys. The 2 bigger squads have claws. And then we've got 3 kill rigs, and one's got Squighide tires. So that's the list. It's triple rig. and then it's got a whole bunch of, it's got 3 smashy characters, and then a bunch of Gretchen and Storm Boys to like run interference and punch things really fast and score green tide and things like that. So yeah, I've made some concessions. Let's talk about things that aren't here in this list before we talk about what is. Especially as a change from the pre-AOO list, the truck is completely gone. So there's no more trucker unit. There's no like reach out and dig out one target. And in favor of that, I've just gone for more high strength AP2 damage 2 across the whole army. I feel like that kind of moderate amount of AP with a moderate amount of damage just stacked across your army is a great way to kill the profiles that are in the meta right now. There's like a lot of Marines up here. There's still a lot of Tau, Chaos, all things that rely on like 3-up armor, 2-up armor, 4-up invul, and 5-up invul, where usually AP 1 to 2 is enough to just like basically put them on their worst save. Which, you know, I just basically think that the AP 3 and 4 options in the Orc Codex have gotten worse. And it's not really worth taking them as much anymore. So the truck was definitely out. I definitely feel its loss in my practice games. Having the truck to, I obviously haven't played Triple Rig at a tournament yet, but I've gotten maybe like 20 reps in with it now. And I definitely miss the reach out and touch element. This list is a lot shorter range. Like it can't just missile out and guarantee one thing hits using the truck, which is a genuine bummer. Like I do miss the insane speed of the truckers. The ability to hit things that the opponent thinks are completely safe. You just go right around, bag past it all, and charge it. But I just don't really like their damage anymore. One big hit that actually, let's talk about how Arks of Omen like affected really quickly about how Arks of Omen affected the orcs. The detachment has affected orcs, because the compulsory choice is nice, but we were kind of fine with 0 or 1 CP anyway. And having to choose between more than 3 elites and more than 3 fast attacks can sometimes be challenging. I know a lot of people have been enjoying knobs. I think like 2 to 3 squads of commandos are mandatory. And at that point, you're not taking any mega knobs. You're not taking any knobs. No weird cute tech like Burna Boys, which is kind of a bummer. But yeah, that is kind of a weird restriction on orcs. And I was trying to think about another one, but I'm forgetting now. So we'll come back to that later, maybe. Another thing that I haven't gone with, getting back on that track, is knobs. A lot of people have been enjoying knobs. I think if you're taking truckers, having a unit of truck knobs is actually pretty good. You just keep them nice and cheap with big choppas. And don't expect them to hit anything on 4s with their power claws, so don't take that. Or as Goffs or Death Skulls, I think you honestly would go with Death Skulls. Giving those guys OBSEC just makes their point scoring ability a lot better. Whereas the Goff ones are just very unwieldy, and other stuff in Goffs is faster and hits comparably hard. So I'm not a big fan of the Goff ones, honestly. All right. Yeah, so that's a little more about list composition. Let's talk now in terms of what units we just talked about. What units we aren't taking. Let's talk about what we are taking. First question we have to answer is, what bosses do we take? We have to take at least one boss who can call the normal Waaagh. So that's a Squig boss or a Foot boss. In this case, I've gone with a Squig boss. I think the resilience is still nice. It's nice to have just like a unit that can more or less own a flank on its own. And other war bosses can't do that as well because they end up dying really quickly. A lot of orc units have that problem of, we hit really hard and we can flip your objective, but in return, we also just die. And it's nice to have one unit that doesn't just die to basically whatever firepower gets pointed at it. You have to hit this dude with like multiple anti-tank shots, and that often is just not feasible if he's lookout zerd. So it's really cool that this guy can just kind of own a flank on his own with 5 commandos and just never get shot back. It's super sick. So he's really good. You can take a lot of things on your Squig boss. I think Beasthide Mantle is the premier defensive trait / relic in the book. A lot of people like -1 to wound, but with things like auto wounding becoming so much more prevalent in the meta, I don't think it's as big. I think the 5-out Feel No Pain just helps out so much. The
Yeah.
twin combo of that and -1 damage just means your opponent's like 2 and 3 damage weapons, which they would normally want to put into your high wound character, just get turned completely off. And you basically have to point like D3 plus 3 damage at him to really get anything through.
I'd agree. He definitely feels tanky enough with just the -1 damage and the Feel No Pain.
Yeah. And I you know, sometimes the opponent puts enough Melto or whatever into him that he dies. And that's like also a lot of investment that could be going into something like a kill rig.
Yep.
So I'm a really big fan of taking Beasthide Mantle and then going like with a more aggressive Warlord trait for damage dealing. In this case, I've gone with Propa Killy. You know, I was just harping on about how AP3 is less important, but it is nice to still have this dude to just go in and get more guaranteed hits through on a target. And into something like marine bodies, which we're going to see a ton of, guard tanks, which we're going to see a ton of, just guard in general, honestly. Being able to punch that armor is really big.
How many attacks does he get to with all that, with the Beasthide and Propa Killy and all that?
It's wild. So he starts with 5. He gets 1 from the Waaagh, 1 from his weapon, 1 from the Mantle, and then you take Propa Killy and you get a 9th. So he has 9 damage, 3, 2 damage. 9 minus 3, 2 damage swings. And then also 3 Squig Jaw Bites that are AP4. So
That's
that
sick.
dude really slams. He's a great hybrid boss. You can't expect him to do everything. You can't expect him to just run in and take your opponent's army. But just as a way to hold down a flank on his own, he is super sick at that. So I've taken him. He calls the Waaagh. We've got Zagstruk, the Rat Supreme. I love this man. He has a little less sauce in the list because there's no truck. Zag busts me so often. Dude, he was doing that for me so much when I started playing him. And he finally came around and proved himself a couple times. He can be very swingy because you're very often using him to do something like dig out like a character with a number of wounds that he kills like 80% of the time. So every time you hit that 20%, it's like, okay, well, there goes Zagstruk doing nothing again. But yeah, he has a semi-reliable chance at killing like any character within 25 inches that isn't completely bubbled out with models. So he, if you haven't played against him before, he has Fly. Or if you haven't played him yourself before, he has Fly. He moves 18 inches because he just can do that on the Waaagh turn. And then he charges you and hops over models in the charge phase. And he's infantry, so he flies right through walls in the charge phase too.
He's like on a 40, a 32?
He's on a 40 mil base.
Nice.
So yeah.
Not that big.
Better prepared to screen that out, or he's coming in and he's slam dunking your characters. Very good.
If you play GSC, you're gonna need bikes. You're gonna need neophytes. You're gonna need to go all the way around. Do not give this man a position to end up in engagement. Do not think about screening in front of him. Do not think about screening behind him. Just characters all the way around. It's the only way. Don't try to get cute with it. It's hate this.
He's amazing in the guard for like double tagging tanks. Classic trick if you have a tank is to put most of your guns into the 5 storm boys or 5 commandos that are tagging you, and then put your other weapons not at -1 to hit out. And if you set up a double tag so that the storm boys are tagging the tank, Zagstruk's also in combat with the tank, but not shootable because he's lookout surd, then you guarantee that the tag will remain tank will remain tagged until your next turn unless they fall back. So that's a really great trick with him because he's so small on such a small base. He can be really slippery and can get in and do stuff like that. Yeah. So we take Zagstruk. He's amazing. Like I said, a little less sauce because of no truck. But he's still definitely worth taking. And then the last boss we take is, we have to make use of the best Warlord trait in the Orc Codex. Ruled by Cunning. Such a ridiculous trait. And really, the best way to do it is just on the highest damage weapon in the Orc Codex, which is or not the highest damage weapon, but the highest damage, like Warboss weapon, which is the Killa Klaw. That dude in some kind of... That combination can go on so many war bosses, and that's really cool. It also shapes how you want to build your list, because which war boss you're taking also informs like the composition of the rest of your list, because they give different auras. That's the really cool thing about war bosses now, is they actually, which ones you take actually affects which units are in your army, which is really cool. Just in terms of the +1 hit aura I'm talking about. Because we go with the Warbike on boss, we don't actually get a +1 hit aura. But we get a dude who goes 20 inches and his toughness 7 and his 7 wounds and slams people like 12 times in the face to damage 3. Yeah, it's pretty good. I've only recently started running this guy again because I've got a new Warboss on Warbike model that I'm really excited about. Certainly a lot cooler than the old crappy guy, but yeah, really fun to play him again. He hits super hard, and no +1 to hit aura for the Storm Boys and Commandos can be a little rough, but we aren't taking knobs anymore, and those units already hit hard enough on their own on 3s. So yeah, big fan of in the couple games that we've played so far, guys. What have you thought of Warbiker Boss?
I mean, he's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, he's solid. He has like 2 distinct disadvantages in my mind that I feel like come up a lot. The first being, like you said, the lack of +1 to hit means for me personally, a squad of Storm Boys or a squad of Mandos hitting a squad of bikes is just not what it used to be. That -1 to hit in melee suddenly becomes a real problem for them. And with things like Fiends coming into the meta a lot more, that also becomes a bit of a concern.
True.
Secondly, is that he moves way faster, but especially on something like player placed or WTC, where you end up with which is say on any terrain format other than UKTC, where you end up with a lot of buildings that are very close together. Move blocking him becomes a real possibility because he can't get through walls in the way that the foot boss could. Yeah. So he picks up one sort of maneuverability and trades it off for another one. Mind you have to think about him if you're going to do that, and you also have to dedicate resources. So very often, even having played in him a bunch now, I will forget that this dude is just wherever he needs to be. Any path that you don't cut off, he just pinballs around. So he's a trade-off. I think he could start to become a liability into some matchups at the higher end, but into 90% of matchups, I think he's just so much better than the other options.
Yeah. And his investment is like practically nothing. He's what, 115 points?
115 points? Yeah, that's the nice thing is in comparing him to the foot boss, they're basically the same number of points. I think the bike guy might be 5 points more expensive after you buy.
He's like 10. Yeah,
5 or 10.
I think the
either way,
105.
It's you're just comparing their data sheets, which is the coolest part. You're not also comparing points. But like, they're basically the same.
Claw. Okay, not Claw. BBK is the most ridiculous warlord trait in the book. If you don't have it in your list, you're trolling. It's effectively reroll all hits and wounds and opponent's successful saves, and it gets around anything that turns off rerolls because you're not actually rerolling. Which, with Custodies coming back into the meta and Votan Void Armor being out there, this guy's great. I don't know. I love that you can use him as either a missile, like if someone's like, "Here's my giant, like scary thing in front of my army," he goes straight up to it and he thunder punches it. Or I kind of like what you do with him, where he like answers a flank and then he's safe and protected. So your opponent's like, oh my god, he's going to charge something again next turn, or I have to kill him now and he's going to fight on death and kill whatever charged him. That's another really great way to use him. He doesn't have to rocket out 20 inches across the board and kill something in no man's land.
Yeah, so another trick I've started using when you're going to be using him as a missile is you can actually protect him when he's doing that, because he basically moves the same distance as multiple other multi-model units from your army. So you can kind of make sure that he makes a charge because he goes 20 inches, have him punch something, and then be set up behind a wall of my army also has 23 Storm Boys. So now we also have to shoot and punch your way through 23 Storm Boys who are giving him lookouts there and standing in front of him with a 5-up invuln, and potentially also like, you know, a unit or two of commandos. And so the Warboss might get to hit you again, and that's going to be very unpleasant.
He's tough.
Yeah, usually the way I played him before, he only really got 1 or maybe 2 activations if he fought on death. Nowadays, I'm usually getting him 2 or 3 activations, which is a scary prospect for opponents. That guy hits super hard every time he connects. Yeah, let's get into Storm Boys and Commandos since we were talking about them just a second ago. The choice of which one to go for is really interesting. Ties back in a little bit with the whether or not to go with compulsory elites or fast attack that we were talking about a second ago. If you favor commandos, I think you go with 5-man squads. I've been really unimpressed with the 10-mans lately. I feel like they just kind of get chewed up and killed most of the time when they deploy aggressively. And when deployed defensively, it's just like a unit of boys that can't go in a transport because you're probably not running a truck. So, I mean, you might if you have 10 commandos, you might be more inclined to run a truck in your list. But I don't know. I'm just not a big fan of them. I think the Storm Boys are so good just for their reach out and touch ability. And with the amount of shooting that's in the meta right now, especially without fallback and shoot, them just being able to go in and tag tanks everywhere, make sure the opponent doesn't move backward on your rush in turn, so good. It's so powerful. And I think having the maximum number of squads of Storm Boys is really important. And then at that point, you're basically pigeonholed into taking fast attacks as your compulsory because you need pigs. They're just one of your cheapest, most effective trading pieces. So if you need 3 Storm Boys and you need at least 2 pigs, you're going to be taking fast attack as your compulsory. So that's one knock against the commandos. I still like small squads. They're good at doing actions. They're good at tagging, very much like the Storm Boys. They're great at starting up fields, so you don't lose points on mission 11, CP on mission 11. I just like 2 squads as MSU trading units. They're really good at that. But
they also
really
force your opponent out, especially on 5 objective missions. A lot of other people do not have a thing that goes over there really quickly, and it'd be really nice with orcs to just try to sit over here and let you get a 4, but saying, oh, I have to go deal with those 5 mandos, which is going to take too much investment, or I'm losing points. Yeah, they're so good.
Yeah, definitely very solid. So you take all of these Storm Boys instead. I think lots of different unit compositions for Storm Boys are valid. I like the MSU a little bit better if you're playing Death Skulls. If you're playing something like Death Skulls, I think 3 5-mans with claws is super good. If you're playing Goffs, though, 5s are still valid, but you just have to accept the fact that they're like not gonna actually clear out a 5-man squad reliably, which is kind of a bummer. Whereas the 10-man squads definitely do, and that's why I like the bigger squads a little bit more. I've got a 10 and an 8 with Klaw, and I've got 5 just with Choppas for doing actions, running in, tagging, being irritating. I like the bigger squads, especially in worlds now where you have to shut down opponent shooting, and you're also very incentivized to go and dig out like semi-squishy characters. You know, Guard have a lot of characters that if you can slip into their backfield on a later turn, you can just like assassinate Lord Solar super easily with 10 Storm Boys. Because I'm assuming they're just mortaring your Gretchen away on the first couple turns. But I guess they could shoot the Storm Boys. But yeah, they can get in there and assassinate characters like that. They can get in and assassinate Space Marine characters very well with AOC going away now. Just 41 attacks at AP1 that wound on 3s. Super good at killing like a bike character or something like that. So I definitely love Storm Boys right now. They definitely have some Predators that are out there. Tower starting to take AFPs again. Mortars are still going to be prevalent. So they have some sketchy matchups, but overall they're just a great tool. The other thing that I forgot to mention this on the list of things that I don't have that a lot of other people are taking is a Weird Boy. The Weird Boy is definitely cool. He can one thing people have been using him for that's really interesting is propping up the kill rigs when they start getting low, because degraded kill rig loses a lot of important stuff, like losing a lot of attacks and losing a lot of strength can sometimes make them a little bit of a wet noodle. And also, this doesn't help with the movement, but a Weird Boy can give a kill rig Fist of Gore. So +2 strength and attack props up the degrading super well and still makes a low health kill rig a threat, which is really cool. And then you can either take the jump or Warpath. I personally like the jump a little bit better for flexibility. But again, I don't think this guy's really worth it. I think the number of times you're actually going to use the jump aggressively is fairly minimal. And at that point, I'd rather just devote those 70 points to another unit that hits hard instead of like a Warp Charge 6 spell that often doesn't go off to make me hit harder. I'd rather just take 7 more orcs, basically.
It's also worth mentioning that if you're taking triple rig and a Weird Boy, at a certain point, you have to wonder about your abhor count.
That's very true. Yeah, because in many matchups, the kill rigs are all dying. And it's not like a Weird Boy is very tanky at all. So, yeah, you can definitely give up 9 to 12 points on that. And you know, I'm fine giving up 1 kill secondary. I already also give up no prisoners pretty decent. And having my
assassinate.
opponent available to take all 3 of those if they think they're going to table me and get like a 40,
Yeah.
a little sketch.
Yeah, it just sort of picks up another category because a lot of people have a good kill E secondary that's going to replace one of those. But to be like, oh, cool, slot another one. Like that's a lot, especially into Tau, which
4
is already...
characters is also a lot. I'm fine with 6 big meaty like orc characters, but just another one, especially another squishy one, is.
I'm in the same spot with GSC. 6 feels like the maximum number of characters that feels like you're not throwing Assassinate out the window entirely. Like you're like, okay, you're getting 9, and then we're gonna play around in the 12 to 15 range. But once you have 7, you have it.
Yep.
Very cool. Speaking of things that aren't in the list, I see a lot of chat in the comments here about some of the other clans. I know you said that Goffs is the best, but I see a lot of conversation here about Deathskulls and even some Freebooters chat. I know Deathskulls had a real resurgence in Spain. I think we put up a bit rep of you and Nick playing Deathskulls versus Votan. How do you feel about those, especially Deathskulls?
I think there's definitely some play there. I think Deathskulls are strong. I think they are.
For the uninitiated, can you walk us through what Deathskulls provide and what Goffs provide so that people know what we're talking about?
For sure. So what I'm playing right now is Goffs, which gives 6 explode in melee, period. Doesn't matter if I charge, doesn't matter if I'm Waaagh, anything like that. Just always melee attack, 6 explode. And +1 strength to melee attacks when I charge. Just super good for doubling down on what orcs are already good at, which is punching the opponent really hard in the face. You miss out on the speed of Evil Suns, but in exchange, you get just an absolute metric ton of damage. So that's what I'm doing right now, just going for max damage with Goffs. Deathskulls, by contrast, gives hit or wound reroll every time you activate. 5-up Feel No Pain against mortals. And it gives infantry models OBSEC. So that's especially sauce with things like commandos, storm boys, knobs, things like that. A lot of the other like older orc pre-beast naga stuff. So you take a lot of more wagons.
Are all the orc characters available to everyone? Can you take Zag as a Deathskull?
No, unfortunately.
Okay.
That is a certain category of characters in our codex called Traveling Gits or something like that.
Yeah, traveling players, you know.
Something like that. Basically, Gaz is in that list, Makari is in that list, but Zagstruk unfortunately is not.
Yeah, because Zag with OBSEC seems saucy.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the Goffs Deathskulls trade-off. You lose some damage, and in exchange you gain some utility and durability, and your MSU gets bumped up a lot because of the innate reroll. I've decided that I like Goffs a little bit more. I think they're able to like punch through the damage a lot better than Deathskulls. You'd be surprised how much the +1 strength comes up, especially combining that with the +1 strength from the new Waaagh. Being able to get +2 strength for a lot of the game can be really big. And then obviously 6 explode is just such an incredibly strong ability, and can really not only improve the average output of your damage, but also sometimes the spiking potential is huge on certain units. Like with Brutal but Cunning, just getting a couple extra 6s in the first round can send that guy into the stratosphere. Yeah, it's strongest on the war bosses, but just in general, the ability to spike 6s can be humongous for your damage output. So yeah, that's where I think we're at. I think other clans are still viable. I like Deathskulls. I like them a lot more in a teams setting because their floor for points is so much higher. They can just go into they can go into far more matchups than Goffs can, and just guarantee that they get a certain number of points because of the OBSEC everywhere, because of the ability to shut down the opponent's primary so much more easily than Goffs. I like them a lot more in a team setting for that reason. I think they're a little worse in singles play, but overall still definitely viable. Freebooters is an interesting one. I think I haven't played a ton with Speedwall lately, or just shooting orcs in general, so I don't really know what the composition of the list is, but I definitely think there's some mojo there. The AOC going away was really big for that list because there was so much IP 2 and 3. The prospect of AOC plus cover for that kind of firepower is really sketch, but if you're only dealing with light cover, then it becomes a lot easier. So yeah, I think there's a lot of juice there. The crazy thing I think is freebooters in combination with Gaskell, because Gaskell calls both Waaghs, and the freebooters actually get a lot of their value. Well, not a lot of their value, but they can get some value in combat again. Now having like +1 attack, +1 strength on them, and giving them a 5-up invul on the turn you call the Waaagh, or the Great Waaagh rather, can be really good. Like the suite of buffs on turn 1 for the Waaagh on buggies is pretty wild. Between the invul and +1 attack and strength, and then all the buffs of the speed Waaagh as well. The buggies just get so much juice out of being with Gaz. So I actually really like Gaskell plus buggies right now. I think it gets preyed on pretty hard by a lot of the heavier shooting. Like toughness 6 just really doesn't cut it, and you can get blown up by massed melt everywhere. But I mean, that's kind of just an orc problem anyway. Goffs have that problem, Deskulls have that problem, so can't really knock you for it if I'm experiencing the same issue. So yeah, I think there's definitely something to freebooters. I think they're very strong. They make good use out of cans as well, because they're like a cheap little unit that can proc the +1 to hit really easily when they come out of reserve and just flame a 5-man unit or something like that. So yeah, that's a unit that I'm not taking in Arks of Omen that a lot of people are. That's actually very solid. Is Killa cans. I think they're very good with Scorches. I've seen them. I've never played them, but
can you walk us through the very important, in-depth, high-level tactical reason that you're not playing Killa cans?
Because I don't have the models. Thoughts?
Because you thought they looked stupid.
Shame there's no way.
They look silly, so I didn't run them. But yeah, Killa cans are really good. I think they're strong with Scorches for proc and the +1 to hit. I think they're also strong with rockets because they're ballistic skill 4. It's a bit of a bummer that if you get tagged in combat, you're not shooting them. But the ability to like reach out and touch a vehicle, it's not bad. They also get the Waaagh buff. So with Gaskell, they're AP 3. Saucy. AP 3 rockets. So yeah, I think Killa cans would also be good in a freebooters list. Let's see. Other clans that I think might have play. I don't think Blood Axes really cut the mustard anymore, unfortunately, without their supplement. There was definitely some cool stuff there when we could do like more commando-oriented things with Surprise and all the cool other Tyler giving me the evil eye. All the other cool stuff you can do with the Blood Axe supplement, but I just don't think they offer enough right now. And then there's like Evil Sons, which they're not an amazing place.
You tried those guys a little bit.
Yeah, it was fun. It was definitely cool to play them with the new Waaagh and get a little bit out of +1 strength, but just did not hit hard enough, unfortunately. Kind of a wet noodle at the end of the day.
Something going kind of a little bit back to the Mandos. Something I see a lot of people still taking, and I know you used to take in the past, are those 10-man Mando squads. What are your thoughts on like the strengths and weaknesses of that, like size of the unit? Or are you not taking it?
It's definitely fun to have a threat that can deploy upfield and like, make charges and threaten the opponent turn 1. But there was a string of games in a row, and I've now also watched a lot of games where this has happened, where they either your opponent goes second, they just get obliterated, or when you go first, they hit like a 5-man unit and don't really get their value, and then they die anyway. So I haven't been a fan of them for that reason. I feel like they always trade down or don't get any value at all. And the other reason is if you deploy them that aggressively, it's not like your opponent has to come forward to any like very extreme angle to shoot them, right? You're either playing on, the trains we're playing on right now are the WTC tables and on player place terrain for the most part. On player place terrain, your opponent is not going to give you anywhere to hide in their deployment zone because orcs don't really have that many guns. And so your 10-man commando squad is just going to get chewed up and die. They're going to have nowhere to hide. On WTC tables, if you're starting that close to your opponent, same issue you're going to have, right? It's super easy for them to cut a shallow angle if you're starting 9 inches off their DZ with something that's in the back of their DZ and just pick up your 10 commandos for free. They just get killed. And even when they don't just get killed and they get a charge off, it's into something small and they just don't get your value. So don't like the 10-man commandos anymore. Still like the 5s. If you want to use them aggressively, they can go and still punch out a 5-man unit, or they can sit back. They can be a trading tagging piece. They can do actions. They can screen. They can be irritating. All sorts of cool stuff like that. yeah, that's why I'm not taking the 10s anymore.
Yeah, I agree.
Another downside of the 10s, in my experience, is that I feel like they really incentivize the turn 1 Waaagh.
Yes.
Because you really want them to be in there, deep in there with the invuln, and then also everything else is hitting you at the same time, and they just increase how much damage you can output because you get guys getting out of transports, moving about and that's just not how orcs function right now, at all.
Yeah.
So you don't want that to be even a consideration in the meta right now.
Well, because the 10-man squad sizes allow you to take the Breacher Ram and the Bomb Squig. And the
Which
Breacher Ram is a really good weapon.
It is genuinely compelling. I mean, both of those upgrades are you auto take them, I think, once you get to a 10-man squad.
The downside with the Breacher Ram is 2 attacks base. So you're really incentivized to WAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAA controlling. So you need to wait for turn 2, which means they have to stage, which means your opponent can just come out and shoot them because they're hard to hide, so they're dead.
Right.
Not great.
Yeah. Especially because a lot of their durability comes from being in cover, and there's not a lot of solid walls in what we're playing right now.
There's like none.
Just some in WTC. It's just
Oh, yes, there are the big 3 stories, but you have no control over where those are going to be. You know.
Yeah. Very likely that being in one of those could just get you shot from anywhere on the board. So yeah. So not a big fan of the 10-man squads, but the 5s are definitely still good. Commandos are also a unit that gets the least out of the new WAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAA HP only when combined with the +1 to wound.
Mm.
But they also, because of their innate like good armor save, they don't get as much out of the 5-up invuln as well. So that's the choice is a little bit informed by the new WAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAA mentioned it in some of the battle report or recaps that we've done. I guess it's really just LVO in the last couple of months. But the new Waaagh has been incredibly powerful for orcs, being able to do most of the fighting that's going to happen in the game with a 5-up invuln is just incredibly strong, and also makes us an invuln army in a meta full of like AP 4 and 5 firepower. So it's great to rely on an invuln save in a meta where there's just so much high AP stuff. It just cuts down on the opponent's like points efficiency super well. There's also a lot of units in Goffs that make great use out of the 5-up invuln. Stormboys are really strong. They get a lot of the 5-up invuln. Zagstruk, people are often surprised when I tell them that Zagstruk has no native invuln save. He's just relying on his 4-up armor. So if he's going to do everything he's going to do on turn 2, having a 5-up invuln staple to his data sheet is pretty darn good.
Well, and his feel no pain, right?
Yeah. Makes between a 5-up invuln and 5-up feel no pain, you can put like whole multi-meltas into that guy and he just will not die. So he gets a lot of sauce out of the new Waaagh. Other units that get a lot out of the Waaagh. It's just great to be able to strength stack in the Orc Codex, right? Because there's a lot of stuff in the game that's right now that's like toughness 5, toughness 4, toughness 8, like a lot of the big tanks that are out there. Being able to direct the right profile into the right like defensive like setup, if that makes any sense. If I just like put the right unit for the job into the right target, the innate like punching ability of Goffs just makes orcs able to wipe out whole swaths of the enemy army in very short order. And the +2 strength really facilitates that, because I can very often get myself like the right target to be able to wound on 2s and 3s instead of 4s and 3s and 4s like it was before. So that's another very powerful part of the new Waaagh. Let's see. I'm trying to think of other units that get a lot out of the new Waaagh.
What about the Gits?
The Gretchen?
Yeah, getting an invuln.
Very true. Yeah, makes them just a little bit harder to peel up.
Like if they're being screens, or like if you're using them to like charge people's units, if you're trying to stop an interrupt, like them having a 5-up invuln is super good. Or like on the turn when your opponent's like, okay, how do I get the good bits and all these orcs in my face? And if they get a beat on your Gretchen, and you're like, okay, I negate a 30 wounds to go through, dude. Like,
yeah, definitely very big.
Going
If
from
someone
a no
also
save to an invuln.
yeah, if someone goes to, okay, I realize I can't win this game by standing on my own objectives because like there's a million orcs that are rushing onto them. Maybe I'll target your scoring and kill your Gretchen on the go turn. Oh, while you're trying to do that on the go turn, you got to also chew through the 5-up invuln that's on those Gretchen right now. Definitely can be a daunting prospect. So yeah, I'm taking 30 Gretchen. A lot of folks are taking fewer. I think I want to try some lists with fewer Gretchen. I think you can definitely get away with 20. For getting the good bits, they still get the job done. With just 20 of them. And it makes Green Tide a little bit worse, but overall, I think you can definitely get away with 20, and that's where you can, if you needed a couple of flex points and you're trying to play triple rig, you could definitely try cutting 10 Gretchen and see how it goes. Yeah, but I think 30 is definitely going to be the mainstay. It makes Green Tide a lot easier, and it's just great to have lots of cheaper units. It's one of Orcs' strengths is the suite of like really cheap toolboxy units that we have available between Gretchen and Commandos, Storm Boys, all things like that. So yeah,
I feel like we haven't talked enough yet about the headline of the army. Why are we taking triple rig? What is that unit doing that other things are not doing? What is it doing that is so scary and effective? Why, like, you're taking 3 of a giant fuck off tank? Like, what gives, bro?
I think the biggest thing is that the shooting and mortals genuinely adds up. As someone who I played 1 rig like a couple times, but mostly I was playing 2. I was finding the shooting and psychic mortals a little bit unreliable. But there's kind of this, I don't know if it's like a category of units, but there's this like general idea that the more of something unreliable you take, the more likely it is to actually hit the average. I think one place that this is especially prevalent is something like indirect, or if you take 1 indirect unit, it might super underperform and not like hit a task that you need it to. But as soon as you take 3 squads of mortars, then you can guarantee that you kill your opponent's like 15 like shitty guys behind a wall, like 15 Gretchen or whatever, like 20 Gretchen. As soon as you get that 9th mortar squad to increase the average. The kill rigs have that same phenomenon where once you go from 2 to 3 of them, they hit that threshold for, okay, this is actually some real shooting and psychic damage a lot more reliably. And in a world full of like really tough targets, having that auto hitting las cannon, having that bunch of mortal wounds can be really powerful. And against armies with no mortal wound mitigation, the mortals can actually add up super quickly. I was surprised into a couple of practice games into Chaos Knights in particular, and also just other power armor armies, how much damage you can get out of like 3 bomb squigs, 3 smites, frazzle, and squiggly curse. That is like 12 mortal wounds right there. That's basically a knight entirely gone. Also, prospects of ramming speed in there as well. Kill rigs are one of the best recipients of ramming speed because they can advance and charge. They can get across the table and make it into something a little bit squishier that maybe their AP2 can hit better, and just put it down. And they're the best recipient for ramming speed for that reason. Another great thing about the rigs. So that's thing number 1 that's great about the rigs is the amount of shooting and mortal wound damage they're doing in a meta that gets punished by mortal wounds for the most part. Thing number 2 they're doing is they're being a great recipient for the Waaagh, because the kill rigs are a natural like bullet sponge. Giving them a 5-up invuln is really big. And the last thing, which is something they've always been good at, they've carried one of the better units in our codex, which is the Beastnagas. Carting 10 of those dudes on in a toughness 8 platform deep into your opponent's deployment zone and keeping them safe while that happens is really, really powerful. And I think the more you can do that, the better. And if I have 3 rigs instead of 2, that's another unit of OBSEC that's being deployed in my opponent's DZ that can just charge basically whatever it wants to. So those are really the three biggest reasons why I've gone with the triple rigs. And it's surprising how much different it plays than two rigs. I would have felt like it would just been basically the same list, but with a little bit more vehicle. But it definitely changes the way the list plays, swapping a truck for the last rig. But I like where it is in the meta right now. I think it fits a lot better than the truck package. Just having another big T8 guy, a little bit susceptible to a lot of the shooting that's out there. But one strategy I'm going to try to employ into shooting armies is putting the rigs in reserve, especially not the guy who doesn't have Squig high tires, because they're great recipients for ramming speed. You can just slip them into reserve and then they're strategic, and then charge something on a board edge and just be irritating on turn 2. A little bit scary into things like guard and marines with infiltrators, but it's just a nice toolbox to have. Very amazing into Votan. So in our practice game this afternoon, Nick, I'm going to give this a shot, and we're going to see how it does. Very excited for that.
I'm seeing a lot of rig hate in the comment section right here.
Really?
John over here says he dislikes rigs intensely, prefers triple wagon and more stuff. Seth, our boy, asks why you think that 3 will survive in this meta. A lot of shade getting thrown around. Start talking about this. Address Seth and then talk to John about why 3 wagons isn't as good as 3 rigs in your opinion, at least.
Yeah, I mean, why do you think 3 will survive in this meta? I don't think it'll survive in this meta. This is why I think the strategic trick might work to keep them alive very well, because you can hide the rest of your army decently against both guard and space marines. The kill rigs are your biggest footprint by far, so you can just slip them into reserves, keep them around for later turns. And yeah, they do get countered by infiltrators, both guard and marines have. But if those units are being used aggressively, then you can pounce on them, tag the guard stuff, and then in the next turn when they don't have those infiltrators up anymore, you can bring the rigs in. You don't have to use them on your go turn for the rest of the army. So it's definitely not that they're being deployed. It might be true that you deploy them and just hope to go first. But I'm gonna try and see if the strategic it might not work. But I think the game plan might be effective. So that's how I'm keeping 3 rigs alive. John dislikes rigs intensely. He prefers 3 wagons and more stuff. I definitely get that. The big detractor from the rigs is giving up Assassinate and their price tag. Bumping the 3 rigs to wagons is like 200 points or something like that. So it gets you a lot more stuff and opens up a lot more transport slots. I've just found the wagons a little bit clunky. I definitely get their appeal. It's great that you can put 20 guys in there, but I find that very often they get stuck further back because of the no advance and charge, and they're easier to move block. They can kind of just get blown up in not blown up in your DZ as easily, but they're more liable to getting just stuck in the midfield and not doing as much. The 20-man, the 20 people crammed inside can also be scary if you get wrapped or something like that. Getting a lot of value lost because you're having to emergency break out and lose like a whole squad on the way out can be very spooky. Whereas a rig, because it's a little bit bigger and because it carries less guys, is less liable to being wrapped. And that's always something you got to think about as well. I definitely like wagons, though. I think you do go with wagons if you go Death Skulls. So I don't know if if you're playing with just Death Skulls, John, but if you are, I think definitely the wagons are the way to go. So I definitely see where you're coming from there.
There are 2 different really important upgrades that you can put on wagons. What do you think about Ard Cases and what do you think about Defrolas if you're going the wagon route?
Oh man, it depends. I think genuinely if you wanted to just carry missile units that hit really hard, like I'm thinking 10 Death Skulls Power Claw knobs, I think you genuinely don't give it either upgrade, and you just have it be 105 point, or I think it's 105 points box that just kind of rolls around and delivers missile units that if they want to actually crack and deal some damage to those units, they have to kill 16 wounds of toughness 7, just a box. So I think you genuinely do neither upgrade if you go with the missile route. I think if you field wagons with Goffs, you probably just try to keep it cheap and go Defrola. The Defrola makes the Goff wagon hit super hard. I don't think the 15 points for the toughness 8 is really worth it. I think you'll probably just get blown up by enough firepower that's out there right now anyway, if you're trying to roll this thing around.
I really hope people take your advice and I get to play into T7 wagons.
True. Yeah, T7 and T8 is genuinely a big hit. Yeah.
I feel like one of the biggest downsides of the wagons, though, I agree, I think the rollers are almost mandatory, because that is part of what makes the rigs so effective, is that you can't ignore them.
Yeah.
Right. Because they, as a late game piece, drive around and mess stuff up in a way that a battle wagon, even with a def roller, really doesn't.
Yeah. Wagons, rigs have this problem a little bit as well, in that the degrading is pretty harsh, losing both strength and attacks. But the great thing is the rig has 8 attacks that are fixed. I mean, they lose some strength, but they're the 4 Squig attacks and the 4 Butcher Boy attacks never go away. You got those attacks when you're on the bottom profile as well. It's just the saw blades that get hit. Whereas when a battle wagon gets fully degraded, it's got down to like, I think it's D3 attacks at strength 6 and nothing else. Like, a degraded battle wagon really ain't much of anything, whereas a degraded rig can still, you know, it's definitely not a full health rig, but it definitely it can hit very hard because of those fixed 8 attacks. So, I mean, yeah, there's pluses and minuses to wagons and battle and rigs. I'm liking rigs a little bit more right now for the speed, for the mortals, for the shooting. But if you want to go cheap, and especially if you want to play Death Skulls, I think wagons can be really good. Another alternative is truck. If you're running a truck or more, you're probably definitely running truck boys at that point. There's no reason to not just take at least 1 unit of those guys. If you have a truck in your list, but they can be good. Great to put Beast Snaggers in there. Also, more reason to take 10-man commando squads if you have a truck. I think they have a little bit more going for them if you have a truck in your list. But yeah, I've had some. The size of the truck is just awkward because of how squishy it is. Can definitely kind of get sniped out, but I think the trucks are still pretty good. So all 3 of our transports are one of the strengths of Orks. All 3 of our transports options are viable. I'm liking rigs a little bit more right now, but other people's experiences may vary.
How do you feel about the 4th transport?
The what is it called? The Squig, the giant Squig,
the Squigith
with the Howdah, the Squigith.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, there's 2 more transports. Yeah.
Okay, what was the one you were thinking of?
The boss head.
Oh my goodness, dude. No. Good try though.
Very cool.
Your choice of boss also works really well with the kill rigs, because that Squigosaur boss gives them the +1 to hit aura.
Yeah.
Which means even when they're limping around on medium and bottom bracket, they're still hitting on like 3s.
Yep.
So
yeah. Or they'll always hit on 3s.
Oh, there's a weapon skill not change?
Weapon skill does not change.
Okay, well then they're still hitting on 2s, even
still
better.
On 2s. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think it's like, if you're playing rigs, you're definitely playing. I mean, you could also play a Warboss on foot because he still gives out that +1 aura, but the Squig boss keeps up with them a lot better.
Keeps up better. He also gives it with a larger aura. Yeah. It's very nice to have that massive base sitting like in the middle of 2 units that are on opposite sides of the table, giving them both +1 to hit. Yeah, it'll be very powerful. So yeah, big fan of that guy. Yeah. All right. What's going on in the chat, boys? Anyone else?
We got people asking about matchups and stuff. So now that we've covered what's in the list and why it's in the list, you want to start talking? Oh yeah, the Stompa and the Gorkanaut Morkanaut are also transports.
Yeah, you
Thanks,
fool.
God, Lucas doesn't
your
even know.
6-man Burna squad in the Morkanaut, dude.
Remember when you used to run Mega Knobs in that thing?
Yeah, 3 Mega Knobs are all that fits in there. You love to see that.
Hell yeah, brother! It's like 280 points for a terrible night. Oh, God.
Yeah. Every edition they say that thing is going to be night equivalent, and every edition it's worse than a night.
They are funny, man. Those things.
Whatever the case, let's move on to talk a little bit about how the list you're looking to do, what the big picture is, how you're trying to score.
Taylor just disappear for you.
Tyler's gone robot mode. I think we're talking about matchups though.
Yeah,
I'll just go into matchups while Tyler's internet resets itself.
My man's is frozen mid sneeze or something.
He definitely looks like he's about to sneeze. Yeah, so matchups right now in Arks of Omen. Like I've been talking about quite a bit, there's a lot of shooting in the game right now, which tends to be a rough meta for orcs to exist in. They can get blown up in a big hurry by a lot of heavy gun armies in the game right now. Space Marines are challenging. How have always been challenging. And Guard are challenging. The good news is into a lot of those matchups that our scoring is really good. So while we're dying on the objectives and trying to rush them down and hold them off the points, we'll be getting a lot of points ourselves while we're doing that. And I think that is the first thing that orc players have to try to exploit when they're going up against these shooting armies is just try to play the mission. You probably aren't going to out damage them because they just have so much firepower. But if you can throw your whole army away in the first 3 turns, getting the max points you can, then I think you genuinely have a shot into a lot of these shooting armies. It can be tough. I know that Space Marines and Guard right now both have a very good scoring as well. And giving up a lot of secondaries yourself between No Prisoners and Assassinate can be a scary prospect for orcs. But I think you just gotta try to play the mission as best you can, especially stomping on their primary. So let's start talking about matchups by addressing the boogeyman in the room, which is Guard.
Bum bum bum.
That matchup is definitely sketch, and one that I haven't played a ton, but I think I have it down to you basically have to. It depends on the contents of their army, but if they have enough indirect, you basically have to go first, because otherwise in the first 2 turns, they will shell all of your Gretchen and Stormboys off the table, which is super bad. So depending on the volume of indirect that's in the opponent's list, I might just have to deploy on the board and hope to go first. The less indirect they have, the easier the game gets, because I can put things like rigs into reserve to constantly threaten the charges off the side of the reliable charges off the side of the board. Which forces them to screen, and then when they screen, I can try to pounce on those screens and do a bunch of tagging with my Storm Boys and Commandos and units like that. I haven't played that game yet. We're going to see how that goes. I think my most reliable Guard practice partner is Max, and I think we'll probably try to play that game sometime in the next week, because I think he has field guns out of his list. But yeah, the less indirect, I think the easier the game gets. So more data to come on that one. Space Marines is also one that I haven't played very much, and somewhere where a lot of their damage is really, really strong into you. All the strength 8 is very sketchy. There's also a lot of like just mass strength. Strength 4 doesn't really bother me that much, but lots of firepower that actually can clear out your bodies very quickly, which I feel like sometimes Guard can struggle to find that. As opposed to just like elite killing ability, that Guard has. But yeah, Space Marines can often kill you in a big hurry, so you have to be a little bit more focused on trading in that game and actually making sure you're keeping pace on material instead of just throwing your army away in a big hurry. So haven't really played that game very much, but in theory, I think the Armor of Contempt changes and maybe their secondaries being a little bit worse than Guards means that orcs can play a little bit of a slower game into them. It's also nice to not have to worry about the Barbican's key unit being initiated on with damage is a lot worse than having the opponent having to come forward so you can pounce on them and actually get a reply. Yeah, so Space Marines are a little bit slower than Guard in that regard. Other matchups, let's see. There's a couple of melee armies in the game right now. I think those armies tend to be decent matchups for orcs. I'm thinking World Eaters.
Yeah, you've been playing that one a lot lately.
Any matchup like that, I feel like orcs have a pretty good grasp on right now. A lot of the melee armies in the game right now were AOC armies, where the biggest problem and why they were sketchy before was they would just refuse like half of my damage because of AOC. And now that that's going away, you can really put the hurt on a lot of these armies in a big hurry. I think at the highest level, matchups like Blood Angels versus Orcs, Space Wolves versus Orcs, and World Eaters versus Orcs are going to be very close run affairs where, I think the Orc player can totally take the win. Blood Angels in particular, Blood Angels and Space Wolves are going to be a little bit easier for Orcs because of the secondaries, right? World Eaters is a sketchy matchup, like in terms of the secondaries. I feel like in terms of us damaging each other, it's like probably Orcs have a little bit of the advantage, or they're roughly comparable. But the ability of World Eaters to score like 90 plus points by basically just playing the game normally with you is very scary. Whereas Space Wolves and Blood Angels have a lot less of that problem. For Orcs, because we have such a secondary advantage, you can go and just bash heads together with them and then come out on 10 to 15 points on the lead on average, I'd say, at the end of the game. But yeah, Goffs have always had a great suite of like enemy melee army tech between Fight on Death, lots of powerful interrupt units. Basically every unit in my army is a viable interrupt target, except for like, the 3 5-man squads I have. Any unit in my army can interrupt and do a ton of damage. So the suite of fight phase control that Goffs have available is just super strong, even without fight last abilities. Fight last abilities are still sketchy for Orcs, but there's a lot less of that now with things like Emperor's Children going away. One of the only fight lasts that I've been regularly exposed to is actually GSC, which is a shooting army, so don't really have to worry about that one. Just not a lot of fight lasts in the meta right now, which Goffs really appreciate.
How about Armor of Russ?
That can be spooky. I think the play for that guy is you just have to trade into him with a character. Sometime in the early game, you just send Zagstruk and 10 Stormboys into him and just ensure that he goes away. You could also send Biker Boss into him and just ensure he goes away. But yeah, that guy can be problematic if you let him, activate himself more than once or twice, because that fight last can be brutal. So yeah, I'm interested in playing the Space Wolves matchup more. I'm not super sold on how it goes. I think my secondary advantage is going to be very big, like I've been saying, but all the strength 8 MSU can be very scary. Be'lakor has fights last as well. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen that spell actually get cast, but sure, theoretically he does.
I think I've seen it go off once out of like
Yeah,
50 times I've seen
off.
someone try to cast it.
Yeah. Demons are an interesting one too. It's great that Orcs have a very solid Demons matchup, I feel like. In general, Demons don't do amazing into like massed attacks with moderate to low AP and decent damage, which Orcs have swathes of. So it's nice to have a solid Demon matchup. Haven't played a ton of it recently, but I feel like overall Orcs have a leg up on Demons. It's nice to not have to worry about that matchup too much.
They might be gone again. The nice thing too is if they're still running a bunch of greater demons, like your entire army gets +1 to hit into that. All the beast snag and stuff does.
Very much so. Yeah.
So.
Well, and it's a matchup where the Orc stratagems are very niche but very powerful. One of the ones where this is most one of the cases where this is most true is with the Beasthide stratagem for 2 CP +1 to wound. Tyler's gone now.
Yep.
The 2 CP +1 to Monster Hunters. You can definitely wombo combo down a big demon with that combination. Something like Be'lakor, the chicken, is very susceptible to just being hit by 1 beast snag unit might not kill it, but 2 with +1 to wound does it 100% of the time.
Yep. Because now you're wounding Be'lakor, you're back to wounding him on 4s now. Yeah.
Back to wounding him on 4s with massed attacks. And I can also hit, well, I guess Be'lakor is the Slanesh strat, but if you don't spend the Slanesh strat, then I'm hitting him on 2s with the Beastboss nearby.
It's not great.
Yeah, definitely not amazing. So it can definitely put a hurt on greater demons in a big hurry. And just in general, demons relatively poor saves in melee are a scary prospect for them and do a lot of.
Flamer nerf is huge for you too. Flamers not just being able to overwatch and kill a whole unit. Now you don't have to sack a whole unit just to punch Flamers to death.
Yeah, definitely true. So yeah, good demons matchup. Great GSC matchup. Chaos Knights can be a little spooky. Imperial Knights I haven't played in a while. I'm genuinely curious how that one goes. But hey, Tyler's back. The Chaos Knights can be a little spooky as well, mostly for the reason of shooting armies tend to be really powerful into Orcs.
Also, Dread works pretty well into you.
Dread works incredibly well into me. Obsec everywhere is also scary. It's hard to flip their primary, which is usually one of the strengths of Orcs, is being able to run onto the opponent's objectives and take them. Doesn't work so well against Obsec 5 everywhere. But that matchup can be won, especially through use of just slower, more defensive play and getting them to come forward. Because if they do come forward, then you can pounce on them and kill them in a big hurry. I'll say that Chaos Knight defensive profiles and just Knights in general don't really stand up to the kind of damage that Orcs have in general. You can definitely kill. I mean, if your opponent lets you, you can kill like 6 or 7 armigers in a turn. Of course, they're never going to let you do that, but like if multiple units connect, it can be the end of a lot of baby knights all in one turn, which can be pretty brutal. But yeah, that's going to be a little sketch. Other shooting armies, Tau. I haven't played Tau since the bomber changes. I think the bombers were pretty problematic for Orcs. Them coming in and sniping out, well, I guess I'm not running a truck anymore, but sniping out all of the fast stuff / the scoring, and then using those bombs to get some reliable damage on kill rigs was pretty problematic for Orcs. Replacing it with the Riptide. The Riptides are pretty scary. They're great at putting down your rigs and pigs in a big hurry, but they're not super amazing into the swaths of bodies you have. So I feel like Orcs don't really care all that much about a Riptide. Stomp. Oh, Seth is talking about other transports. I don't know. The Stomper has just been bad for so long. I've blocked it out of my mind. I honestly forgot that it existed. Sadness.
How do you feel into like different like pointy years? Like Eldar, Hail of Doom's coming back.
Yeah.
Harlequins might not quite be dead yet. How do you feel against those armies?
Harlequins are interesting. Let's hit Harlequins first. The prevalence of all their melee characters makes things a lot more spooky, and well, actually not as much, because I'm not really running any squishy characters anymore. And the primary purpose of those units is to run in and assassinate like a squishy character.
Yeah. Like the Fang Master's got the wounds on 2s into like everything, but you'll fight on death and uppercut them.
Yeah, it definitely the only real target they have a hope of killing, honestly, is the biker boss, because other people have Feel No Pains or -1 damage, which can be scary for Harlequin characters.
Mhm.
And one of the newfound strengths of Harlequins, well, there's 2 big things. The reasons why they're strong is the Mirror of Minds. What's the minus?
Mirror Architect.
Mirror Architect.
Yep.
That is more or less useless into Orcs. So that's just dead weight, and was one of their biggest
like
defensive
90
tools.
points now, isn't it?
Something crazy like that, 70 or 90.
60 or 70, yeah. I mean, it's relevant into like your war towers because those auto hit, which actually are pretty good into their boats. But yeah, overall, it's not that relevant into Orcs compared.
Overall,
to
not that important. And then the other thing is, like I said, they're all these assassin characters. The Death Jester coming back. That guy is a big problem for a lot of people's characters right now. And the only character I really need to be worried about him assassinating is Zagstruk, sort of.
Yeah. He's really big just into your units, like into pigs.
He's definitely nice at whittling down units.
Because he has a thing where like every model he kills counts as 2 for the purposes of morale.
Yep. So he's pretty good into the orc units, but I don't need to be worried about him sniping out my characters, which is nice. And then just the general lack of durability from moving from a 4-up to a 5-up means I think you can more or less just blitz the Harlequin player, except that you lose all of your rigs and pigs when they come in with all their fusion pistols and mortals and stuff. And then you just slam them with every other 1 damage attack in your army. And hopefully that's enough.
The thing about Quins, too, is their secondaries want them to be on your side of the board.
That's true.
Eventually they're going to have to come to you, which is great for Orcs.
Yeah, you probably don't want to actually rush them, like I was saying. You want to wait until they come forward to you, and then you blitz them with everything and just try to like overwhelm them in one go. Because they're, like you said, the deadly performance and behind enemy lines is such a good combo for them. They're required to come over to your side of the table.
Yeah. They might take no prisoners into you instead over deadly.
And or assassinate. Oh, you mean instead of deadly in that category? Yeah,
like assassinate, no prisoners behind seems a lot safer.
Right. Definitely. But yeah, I think overall Harlequins, because the tempo of the game is so much more in my favor, like they have to come forward to me rather than the other way around. I I think it is a game that's in the Orcs' favor. I also think that's true for Craftworld Eldar. A little less so for Hail of Doom.
Yeah.
One of the weaknesses of Eldar is all the strength 4 and 6 lines up pretty poorly into the Orc defensive profiles overall. Being able to auto wound on basically your whole army gets around a lot of that. So I think Hail is well positioned to not necessarily well positioned to deal with Orcs, but it has a lot better shot than any of the non-Hail craft worlds for sure.
Well,
Hail's an interesting one. Go ahead.
You played into a Hail-esque Ynnari list, and that's what ended up taking you down at LVO, right?
Yeah, that's definitely true. A lot of that game, I mean, Ben played that game very well, and he took advantage of all the mistakes I made, but I made a lot of mistakes that game.
Yeah.
And I feel like I can definitely give him a closer one if we run that back. The ability to shut down the Orcs scoring can be scary for the Orcs. Just those Warwalkers throwing themselves away to basically get rid of all of your cheap trash on turn 1
Shroud
can be
Runner
really spooky. That does only work half the time, and if the Orc player sets up for it, they can actually deny a fair amount of the shots. Like maybe they only lose half of their trash on turn 1, which that can be a lot better because then you still have units for Get the Good Bits and Green Tide. But yeah, I think overall Eldar is a fine matchup for Orcs. Just the strength buff from the Waaagh, their reliance on high AP and our invulns across the board just mean that they lose a lot of efficiency, and we can definitely kill elves in a big hurry. So what are Eldar secondaries like these days?
I feel like they're usually taking Warp Ritual.
Yeah,
because that's pretty guaranteed with like
Warp
that Quicken
Ritual,
Warlock.
Path, and Gauge or behind.
I mean, into you, they'd probably take no prisoners.
They probably take some kill secondaries.
Yeah,
so they can
Path plus behind is a great combo usually because you just drop Rangers in and they're like points twice, sweet, and a CP because I'm a troop.
Yeah,
yeah. They Assassinate's a little weird into you. Like what? Little comment here I want to bring up. Matthew Atwood brings up that Hail of Doom plus Harleys seems very prevalent, and I've been hearing a lot of talk about this Hail of Doom core with a Assassin Troopmaster plus Assassin Death Jester patrol.
Right.
And those are better at Assassinate, but like you talked about earlier, Harleys are not that great at assassinating your characters actually because of how tough they are.
Yeah. Also, just how much less than strength 8 damage they have that it's multi-damage. That they're just super bad at killing the kill rigs because Ramshackle kicks in. So Assassinate can be extra sketch for that reason. Literally all of my characters have some kind of like innate, very strong defensive perk to them that makes them hard to kill for elves and harlequins. So
I want to talk about our defensive armies because we've talked a little bit about how Orcs are very good at like a weird thing that kind of came up in Nephilim and is also now like really like solidified in Arks is that there's some matchups where you can just score more secondaries than your opponent by sitting on your side of the board. So you get to let them come to you. What about the armies that score better than you sitting on their side of the board? Like on paper, Necrons have got a little bit nerfs to that. It might actually be pretty equivalent at this point. The Necrons and Orcs passive. Same thing with Sisters. They got a little bit of a nerf to Leap, but I feel like it might edge out a little bit. Like Defend the Shrine's really good still. I know Leap could still be pretty good. Like if you're not engaging with them, then they don't really need to use those Miracle Dice to play the game. They can just use them for points. What's your plan into like? I guess those are the two most sit back and score armies. So what's your plan into that? How do you feel that matchup goes?
I think you play those games a lot more aggressively, and you accept that your cheapest units do a good enough job at getting you all of your points, while all of the expensive stuff in your army runs in and just does as much damage and causes as much disruption as possible. So because they have to, for things like Defend the Shrine, what's their other secondary called? Sacred Grounds or whatever.
Ground, yep.
They have to come forward and be on the midfields a little bit. You punish that by just blitzing your whole army at them over the course of the first 2 turns and just trying to deny every point possible. Same kind of thing into Necrons, right? You throw your whole army away over the course of the first 3 turns, and you hopefully deal with most of the stuff that they have in the mid board. And at that point, you've probably accrued a 10 to 15 to 20 point lead, and then you spend the last couple turns just trying to maintain that lead, even though most of your army is dead at that point.
Here's like a weird little game theory thing I'm thinking of. What?
Sure.
So going into, say you see a Necron or Sister's opponent across from you, what
Sure.
secondaries are you taking?
I'm probably, well, against Sisters, you can probably, the first thing I'd look for is an opportunity to take Stomp 'em Good. When I come to the secondary table, that's always what I look at. I think it's definitely takeable into Sisters because they have a couple of melee units, but overall, you're going to kill all of their units in melee, and they're very MSU, and they have a lot of characters. That's generally a trifecta of like, okay, now Stomp 'em Good is getting very reliable. So I think I would take Stomp 'em Good into them, and then obviously into Necrons you have things like no prisoners. So I've got a kill secondary lined up into each one of them, and then at that point I'd probably just take the standard defensive good bits and Green Tide, let my Gretchen score those points, and then just run in and try to do as much damage with the three, the pigs, the rigs, the storm boys. Just throw that all directly into their face and try to deny them 10 to 15 points, and then maintain that lead on turn 4 and 5.
Because what I'm thinking that's very strange. So when I was playing Necrons, right? A lot of the times I look at my opponent and go, oh, my defensive secondaries are better than them, so they're going to bum rush me. But they give up no prisoners and assassinate like in spades. And if they bum rush me, which is the correct counter to stopping my scoring, it's actually going to be really hard to score like ancient machines and treasures. So I'm just going to take no prisoners and assassinate. And then we lock in our secondaries, reveal them to each other, and they're like, oh, my secondaries are kill you. And I'm like, my secondaries are kill you defensively. And then we just run at each other and I win still. But like, so that's what I was wondering is like, if you go up against a Necrons player, like, all right, I'm going to take no prisoners, Green Tide, good bits. And then they go, hey, surprise, I took no prisoners, assassinate, purge. Do you still play aggressively, or do you
then I pivot the style because they have two. It just depends on the ratio of how many aggressive versus defensive secondaries I have relative to them.
Yeah.
Right.
Whereas Sisters, it sounds like you're taking too aggressive. So if they flip and they're like, I'm taking assassinate no prisoners.
In the Sisters, I'd still take Green Tide and get the good bits. And then I'd take Stomp 'em Good.
So yeah, that's a good thing I'm saying is like, if you lock in 2 kill secondaries, they could flip it on you, which all of a sudden now you're playing an aggressive game that they want you to play.
Exactly. Yeah. If I have the go kill them secondaries, or sorry, if they have more of the go kill them secondaries, then I'm going to sit back and make sure that they have to run out to me first. Yeah, and I feel like that is an especially spooky prospect. I feel like the Sisters matchup is probably pretty good for Orcs at this point. For that reason, because if they take their defective secondaries, I can deny them a whole bunch by just running at them and trying to do as much damage as possible. And if they take the aggressive secondaries, then they have to come to me. And that's really not where Sisters want to be, I feel like. The relative immobility of that codex and just how quickly it dies to a lot of the Orc offensive profiles right now can mean that I think it's generally Orcs favored, and the Sisters are just trying to hang on. But yeah, Necrons is an interesting one. I think it's probably Orcs favored, but I'll have to play that one some more.
The exclusion of the Silent King from pretty much every Necrons list now makes it much more Orc favored. That Fights Last was key to winning the Orc matchup, and
reroll wounds into the high toughness profiles as well. Big value.
Yeah.
So having him gone is definitely looking good for Orcs. So wait, is he allowed to be taken in Necron lists?
Yeah, so they fixed whatever issue that there was. I'm pretty sure when they FAQ'd Arks of Omens, it calls out like you can take the king in an Arks of Omen attachment, even if it's not Zarican. The one thing that you can't do anymore, since it is no longer a Zarican detachment, if like say you're playing Nihilok, which is one of the new more popular subfactions, you can't use the 4-up auto deny because you don't have a Zarican detachment.
Interesting.
So something also for Abaddon players out there. You can't use Black Legion stratagems if he's, say, in your Emperor's Children Arks of Omen army.
Oh,
you don't have a Black Legion.
You were
so
mentioning
he
this.
can, he can no longer become Red Corsairs unless you're playing mono Black Legion.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah. King being out, very good for Orcs. People are just not finding him worth it.
He just dies too quickly in this meta, dude. Like, he sticks the toe out and the guard player says, very cool, and he instantly dies.
Yeah, ordinarily, I'd say put a unit like that in Strat Reserve, but his auras and abilities are so important that you're losing a lot of value if he's sitting off the board for 2 turns.
Yeah, he also comes on, shoots 2 Menhirs, and then tries to roll a 9. Like, all right, man, yeah, it's not great.
But Lucas, how do you feel into the actual...
For Orcs.
How do you feel into the actual meta Necron list?
But by that you mean like Nihilak with all the scoring?
No. The actual.
No.
Oh,
the actual meta Necron list.
That's true, dude. The Tesla Spears, they be tearing me up. The Monoliths, they be transporting me to other dimensions, and I'm here for it.
They have 6 auto-hitting attacks in melee, dude.
That's spooky, my man. My tagging
Man,
unit is definitely
I
dead.
was gonna say they're definitely not ever gonna actually swing.
What if we
and if
put
they do, it's not gonna
3
be
Storm Boys
without
in
being
front of them?
degraded.
They can't move over because they don't have fly.
But Monolith.
Nah, I don't know.
That's
man.
pretty compelling.
Yeah.
Bring Core back to the king so we can veil him, please. Thank you. That's it.
Other matchups that we might want to talk about for Orcs, guys. We've talked about defensive ones like we talked about defensive ones like Sisters and Necrons. We talked about melee matchups a bit. We talked about some shooting matchups and that they tend to be the sketchier ones. Anything I missed? We talked about pointy ears.
Yeah, I mean, you talked a little bit about like not really having a lot of fight phase control, like running into fights last is a bummer, but there's not.
Sorry that I was.
Ton of
My internet's
them.
been terrible. Have you talked extensively about Dark Angels yet?
No, not really. And that is one that I have not played yet and probably won't for a while just because there aren't a lot of Dark Angels players up here. There are definitely some. But I don't know. It can be sketchy. A lot of the defense in Dark Angels comes from resilience to shooting between the Raven Wing invulns only working in shooting, and then also Deathwing being their tankiest when they're in cover with a Storm Shield. Orcs don't really care about either of those things, right? We just have the attacks and we do it in melee that we can just basically punch through either of those units. The Deathwing en masse is what I'm most worried about. I feel like you were kind of mentioning this and why we think the more Deathwing lists tend to be a little bit scarier is you were mentioning this the other day, Tyler, how, every 10 Terminators you add on is not just like an additive bonus to the durability, but it's like multiplicative where you just can't deal with them all fast enough. So like 10 Terminators plus a bunch of Ravenwing, you can probably handle the 10 Terminators. But as soon as there's like 30 or 40 Terminators, it's more than just like 3 or 4 times as much durability. It's like 5 or 6 times more because you have to devote so much more to it, and there's no other squishy pieces you can take out first. So I feel like the 30 or 40 Terminator list is much scarier for Orcs to have to deal with. The more Ravenwing, the better. It's definitely sketch to get pounced on by Ravenwing and have them, like similar to the Warwalker problem, kill all your scoring immediately. But unlike the Warwalkers, specifically in Eldar, Marines aren't very MSU. So once you start hitting them back, they lose assets really quickly without AOC. So I feel like if you just weather the storm, you can try to pounce on Ravenwing and just kill everything that's not a Terminator on the go turn, or try your best to, and then move on from there. So Dark Angels, sketchy matchup on a sliding spectrum from the most Ravenwing is the least sketchy, and then the most Deathwing is the most sketchy. Obviously, again, like a lot of the matchups I've been saying, I haven't played them a ton of triple rig yet, so I don't have a ton of data on this. But I think overall, that's where we are for Dark Angels.
Makes sense.
Yep. Talked about Tau. Yeah, I think that's it. No need to talk about NIDS anymore.
Lol.
Very well. But yeah, I think that's where Orcs are. A bit of a bummer that, I mean, I personally think that unless the pairing gods really bless you in singles play, it can be sketchy for Orcs to win a tournament right now just because shooting is so strong. And at any point in time, if you like go second against the wrong shooting army on the wrong, not necessarily on the wrong board, but like it can be scary to deal with those shooting lists. But into everything else, I think Orcs are very well positioned. So if the pairing gods smile on you, you can do very, very well with Orcs. They're in a strong spot. I think they're strongest for teams play, where you can kind of keep them away from those heavier shooting armies, where they can just go beat some stuff up that doesn't have the most guns. But yeah, overall, Green Tide in a very strong place. I think there's a lot of viable options, as we've heard people talking about in chat. Others are having success with other things. I think rigs are really strong, wagons are really strong, different boss loadouts are really strong, and that's the coolest part. Okay, on math, 15 Burning Boys with Zap Compass and Warpath. Is that true? That's pretty sick. Oh, wild. Yeah, that is the Terminators. It can be.
Please read the whole thing out loud so that podcast listeners know what you're talking about.
For sure. So John says on math, 15 Burner Boys with Zap Grumpas, Warpath, +1 hit and 5s explode, and 2 AP. So every buff you can put them on. So if you give them all the buffs, they can kill 8 Deathwing Terminators, which is pretty cool. It can be hard to line up all those buffs all at once. But I guess a couple of those are CP, so those are pretty much on demand. But yeah. Orcs have a lot of abilities to kill Terminators, but we can't kill more than like 10 in a turn, and that's why I think it's kind of sketchy the more Terminators you get. The rigs actually help out with the Terminators too, between the AP3 shooting that I guess it doesn't it auto hits, not auto wounds, but the shooting and then the couple of mortal splash in there as well can help soften us from Terminators. Yeah. So yeah, overall Orcs in a really strong place. Like I said, probably a little bit better for teams right now than singles, just in terms of overall prevalence of shooting in the meta. But feeling excited to play triple rig and try out some new things in the future.
Shall we turn to the final segment of an orc episode?
Sure.
We've talked a lot about what to do as an orc player in a lot of situations. Now we got to figure out for the rest of us, what the hell are we going to do about the orc situation? Yes. I'm not going to say as much as I would like to because I don't trust my internet right now to start monologuing. But what are the things? Obviously, unit-wise, we can talk about. You talk about how particular shooting archetypes are particularly problematic. But first off, if you're playing those shooting archetypes, what are the mistakes that people make that you're able to capitalize on that we want to avoid? And then we can start talking about in some of the less obviously favored matchups what you can do about orcs.
Yeah, so if you're playing a shooting list, the main danger is, well, there's two main dangers. Either A, losing too much material in the first couple turns, and I feel like this is the mistake most people make. If you're playing really aggressively with, not really aggressively, but if you're not playing very defensively, if you're not basically backlining your whole army and just spending the first 2 or 3 turns shooting the orcs off the table, I think either I'm underestimating underestimating the durability of your army, or I think you're probably playing too carelessly with your stuff. Because Goffs can kill a lot of like Guard and Marines and Tau's army if they're anywhere nearby. And I think you want to keep your stuff alive as long as possible and just get as much shooting done in the first 2 or 3 turns as possible. And I think to do that, you basically want to deploy on the back line and not get charged for as long as you can. One of the best ways you can facilitate this is try to bait out a Waaagh, or like put out enough stuff that like there's some incentive to Waaagh, but they're not getting max value out of it. So like if you're just screening with 20 guardsmen and that's it, you don't have any other tanks up there, you don't have any other infantry up there, so the orc player isn't going to hardly get any value out of their Waaagh. How are they going to answer your 20 guys who are stood on objectives? They have to advance in charge to get to you, and that means that their once per game ability is going to be completely offline for next turn. So you want to be screening with as little as possible that does force the orc player to come out. I think that is probably where you want to start if you're playing a shooting army, is just try to put 4 little pieces of bait and see when the orc player takes the bait, and then spend the rest of the game trying to table them. So that's kind of the approach you want to take.
Can you talk about how the points work in that situation? Because you're telling me that like you're going to score a lot better than your opponent in general, and now they're sitting on the back line. How does that result in a losing situation for the orcs?
The screening elements that you're putting forward have to be in a position where they're going to score points if the orc player doesn't answer them. So you want to like stand just on the edge of charge range, doing your boots on the ground, banners, Oath of Moment, whatever it is. Just far enough for that they're scoring those points, but also that the orc player has to Waaagh to try to get to you. So that can often be the best way to do that. And it can be scary. I mean, that's a game that's going to come down to, if you're going to play very defensively and I am not as incentivized to Waaagh on you, there's going to be a lot of stuff left at the end of the game, and there might be a lot of stuff left at the end of the game, and then also it's going to be very close on points because I'm going to be scoring very, very well in the first 3 turns. It's a game where the orc player scores a ton of points in the first 3 turns, and then the shooting player scores a ton of points in the last 3 turns after the Waaagh has happened. So it can be sketch, but I think that's your best chance, because if you try to contest in the early game, you're at risk of losing a bunch of your damage dealing ability, and then the orcs taking over in the second half of the game, which is like worst case scenario. So that's why I think the defensive play works out a lot better. You just have to kind of keep the points in mind and make sure you're not getting tempoed out on the board. So that's how to play shooting. I think that kind of approach gives the shooting player a little bit of an advantage, even if the points are close. If you're playing something like a melee army like Wolves, Blood Angels, World Eaters, or if you're playing a defensive army like Sisters or Necrons, I think this is where you have a rough matchup into Orcs. And I think obviously this applies a lot more in a team setting, but you just have to try to play the points as much as possible. Get every single point you can. Look for opportunities to jump into the Orcs backfield and deal with their scoring. Because if I'm throwing away my army, trying to like do a ton of damage to you and rush you down, then my backfield theoretically is exposed. And if you can like slip some Zephyrim in there, slip some Exalted 8-bound in there, get a squad of Sanguinary Guard loose in the backfield, the Orcs don't really have the time to run around behind and get to that unit. We want to keep going forward. In general, that trick works very well against Goffs because they don't want to turn around. They don't have great units for dealing with problems in their backfield. If you can get a unit in their backfield, it can not only be problematic on that turn, but on like turn 3 and 4 and 5 as well. And that unit can definitely be alive, causing problems at the end of the game, even if you just like deep strike into my backfield on turn 2. So trying to take care of the orc scoring can also work very well if you have one of those disadvantageous matchups like a melee army or a defensive secondary army. I feel like another matchup we didn't talk about, and one where that we should, is Votann a little bit. If you're playing Votann into orcs, some things you can do, because the secondaries for Votann aren't scored. There's just a lot less scoring for Votann compared to the other shooting armies like Marines and Guard. I think you have to come to orcs, and that is another strategy that I think can work very well, is just take the table secondaries and bet the game that you're going to play a game where you basically tell the orcs that you're going to outkill them. And I think the Votann can actually do that because of the invulns everywhere, because of the AOC that's still present on all of their units, and just how much damage they can do to orcs in a big hurry, especially berserkers. I think it is a valid strategy if you're playing massively from behind on the secondaries department to just take whatever other one secondary you have and then like assassinate and no prisoners and just bet the game on tabling the opponent. And I think that we'll obviously see what that playstyle looks like in our practice game together today, Nick. But I think that approach can actually work really well if you have a secondary disadvantage, is just bet the game on a big brawl coming out on top.
Yeah, we were talking about that the other day too. Like something like Abhor might even just be the best pick because it's better than something like Banners where you have to hold the board.
Yeah. I think Abhor could work there, specifically in our matchup. I think also Lay Claim could work well, because if your plan is to just table me, you'll probably have stuff left at the end as well, and then you can pick up 10 to 15 points on Lay Claim. Obviously, that if is a big if. This whole plan is a big asterisk, which is maybe Lukas wins the big brawl that's happening in the center, or maybe Nick wins it. But if you're going to lose in the passive secondary game anyway, then you may as well, bet on winning the exchange of blows that's going to happen in the middle. So I think if you have a big disadvantage, you can definitely just take aggro secondaries and hope for the best if you feel like the secondary game is going to be hopeless. So yeah, that's kind of how to. Let me hop into the YouTube real quick and see if anyone has any questions about playing against orcs, or other thoughts about how to counter them. No, just people talking about Terminators. Any other thoughts you guys have? As two individuals who have played against orcs quite a bit. Anything else? Incredibly irritated to get with bad internet. Anything else you guys want to bring up in terms of how to play against orcs? General best practices?
Don't backline your army turn 1. If you are deploying outside the max WAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAA for an 11-inch charge turn 1 because that's a loss condition.
Yeah, when I just said deploy on the back line, that was probably a bit of an exaggeration. You want to stay far enough up that you can get onto the objectives, but not that your units are actually like your important units are being punched while they're on those objectives. That's pretty bad.
I just hear about this all the time where someone asks you, "What's your max Waaagh threat range?" You're like 26 inches, and then they're like, "I'm 26.1 away," and you're like, "All right, man, I'm moving to the midfield, and now you can't counter punch me."
Yeah, that's definitely fair.
Like, don't
just don't. Really, what I meant when I said just bait with your small units first is don't get them punched for no reason.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Like,
Getting units punched for no
line
reason
with
is
your
bad, but
expensive
also you don't
stuff.
need to be constantly worried about my max threat range. Because if I'm just within max threat range, then I mean, I'm assuming I roll a 6 on my sixes on my
Other
charges
things into
anyway.
orcs. I think
Kill
John
aggression
talks
win the
here. He says kill aggression won the game. That is true. The thing about good bits is it's so easy to score because it's 4 points each time the action happens that like it's actually just genuinely super hard to stop. I wouldn't overextend to kill the Gretchen because yes, you might kill the Gretchen and that's great, and you might like I don't know, they might get a 12 on good bits. That's cool. But like if those shots could also have killed 10 Storm Boys, do that instead because the Storm Boys are going to be messing up like your units.
Yeah,
just accept
if you
that they
go
get a 15 on good bits.
if you go second on a lot of missions, they can have a 12 before you can even hit them.
Yeah,
that secondary is silly. If you have the ability to properly stop it, that's cool, but you probably don't. You know if you do, and you probably don't.
Yeah,
let that happen. But kill the Gretchen.
Whenever someone says they're going to deny my good bits, I always respond with the question how. And if they don't have a very clear plan pre-game for how they're going to do it, I don't think you should even bother trying because it's probably going to be like a 12 to a 15.
I think Guard are like the only army who reliably can because of mortars.
Yeah, I think Eldar can also do it very well. Because
if they go first with Shroud Runners and stuff.
Yeah, so when I was at LVO, it was the question of, hey, Eldar guy in round 6, do you have a clear and defined plan of how you're going to get the good bits in Green Tide? Yes. If I go first, my Warwalkers will move forward 10 inches and kill all of them. And if I go second, those guys will be completely safe. Okay, that's a solid plan. If your plan is at some point on turn 2, I'm going to kill your Gretchen, that's not a good way to get the good bit, get the good bits. So if you have a good way to do it, definitely do it because it can be a good way to deny points. But if you don't have a very clear plan, then don't bother.
And remember, it's not a Grot secondary. It's a core secondary that's better if you're Grots. So if you manage, if you're playing something like Bomber Mission, where there's a really rapidly accessible midfield objective, cool, you killed all the Grots. The 5 Mandos do it anyway.
Yep. That's the thing about the pregame, the forward deploying Mandos, they'll often just start the good bits action behind a wall. And then you don't kill them. And you pass back to Lukas, and he goes, cool, I get 4 points. Now my Grots are walking to the midfield. I start the action with the Grots and the Mandos. The Grots do it. I'm at 8. Try to stop the Mandos so I don't get a 12 next turn on turn 2.
Yeah, you'd be at a 6 because you scored it twice on turn 2.
Oh, yeah. I scored a top and bottom.
Still being at a 10 at the end of turn 2, or the beginning of turn 3. Totally fine place to be on good bids. So have a good plan for it. Otherwise, don't bother.
I think that there hasn't been a lot of discussion about move blocking yet, and that feels weird in a discussion about how to deal with orcs. Orcs are the most move blockable army in the game other than knights right now.
World leaders. But yeah.
They're more move blockable than world leaders. Because the problem of them that orcs are going to run into is that they're trying to move with pigs, fat bases, don't move through walls. They're trying to move a bike boss, fat base, doesn't move through walls. They're trying to move a kill rig, very fat base, doesn't move through anything. So if you have the right kind of chaff, the right kind of cheap units, standing in the right places can really keep them in one place at once. And that can make it really hard to decide if they're wogging or not. Because if I say, cool, you can wog, and this half of your army collapses into a squad of 5 rats, do you want to do it? You sure you want to do it? I want you to do it. I think that I spent a really long time trying to move block all of the orcs everywhere. That was the plan. It was, we're not going to let anything seep through. We're going to put all of our resources into this block, and it's going to be great. That's the wrong plan. That is not the correct decision. It costs too much to do it. What you want to do is say this flank over here that has the most easily move blockable stuff, that shit is staying right there. That's going to stay and I won't exist.
Yeah, definitely. If you try to move block everywhere, you can lose a lot of assets in a big hurry. But if you just use like 2 cheap 5-man squads to block up the 2 biggest choke points on the board, totally sufficient, and can be irritating for the orcs to deal with because they don't know whether or not they want to Waaagh or not. I think it was basically what Tyler was getting out there. So, yeah, those are some chips to deal with orcs. Yeah. Anything else you want to add, Nick? Any other thoughts about how to play against orcs before we wrap up? I think we should, considering Tyler's internet, probably start packing it in soon.
Yeah. Just in general, you know, like be well versed in combat. Like orcs are combat army. They're going to eventually come into melee with you. I mean, like we could have a whole episode on combat movement, and maybe we should do that at some point with you talking about it. But they're going to be trying to pull some stuff off against you. You can do it vice versa, especially to like mitigate interrupts and mitigate fight on deaths.
Yep.
So, yep.
All right, cool. So yeah, thank you guys for coming. We're coming up on the 2-hour mark, so we'll probably call it quits here. It was great fun to talk about orcs. If you want to keep the conversation coming regarding orcs in particular, but just about anything in general. Oh, Tyler's back. Hello. We're gonna do some of the wrap up stuff, unless you have anything else to. Nope, he's not back.
Nope, not at all. Quickly before my internet dies, thank you so much for listening. Oh, Lucas is already doing plugs. Do plugs, Lucas.
Oh, okay. I was gonna have you do it because I don't know any of them.
So, did you already do the plugs?
No,
Oh,
I did
okay,
not.
I can do the plugs. That's fine. If you enjoyed what you're listening, want to keep the conversation going, you can join us over on our Patreon-only Discord feed. That's a small subscription. If you want to catch all of the content that comes out on the YouTube, including more bit reps and behind-the-scenes content, you can check that out over on YouTube. More important than any of that financial stuff, though, please subscribe to us on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast, jump into the YouTube. It's really great. Likes and comments are the biggest thing for the algorithm. We're really trying to be a push on YouTube, especially this podcast in particular. If you're coming to Rosehammer, please come by and say hi. We're going to have stickers for everybody. Yeah, if you want a sticker, please just come up and ask us for one. That's going to be really cool. We love meeting people. We love talking about the game. If you couldn't tell, we love the sound of our own voices. If you like our silly little icons, check out our merch over at store.bestintable, or I don't remember if it's bestintabletop.com/store or store.bestintabletop.com, but it's one of those. You can get t-shirts, you can get mugs, you can get tumblers, lots of cool stuff. If you like stomping them good, we have a shirt that says stomp them good, and it's pretty cool. So with that all being said, thank you so much for joining us. As always, keep it mean, keep it green. And with that all being said, I've been Tyler.
I've been Nick.
And I'm Lucas.
And we'll see your gitch next time for the Rosehammer GT. Take care, everyone.
Goodbye, boys. Wow.